Sweet.
Hey now, and how are you doing? I want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Man, today we're going to bring up a really funny guy, but we're also going to talk about something really serious, mental wellness, and I can't wait to talk to my friend Frank. How are you doing today, Frank?
David, I'm doing well. Your audience should know that I'm not here voluntarily. It was part of a plea bargain. It was jail or spend some time with David. And I thought, well, okay,
I
fine.
would have taken the jail. I got to tell you, man. That would only be for a short amount of time, but I still might have taken the jail. Uh, but I appreciate you coming on, and
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. And one of the things, I really want to talk about is mental wellness. I have a huge passion for that. And okay, let's start off right off the bat. You're a comedian. You've worked at the highest levels. I mean, you've worked with Jay Leno and
Mhm.
people like that. But you talk about mental wellness. How does a comedian talk about mental wellness? I need to know.
Well, I think comedian's a good choice. Uh, the world's first comedian was the court jester, and the court jester's job was to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. I believe I speak truth to the power of mental illness on behalf of those often powerless in its grip with humor. I believe where there's humor, there's hope. Where there's laughter, there is life. Nobody really dies laughing. And depression and suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. And in 2010, after Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Literally.
Mm.
Spoiler alert, did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine came up after a keynote last year, thought he'd be funny. Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey man, can you try to sound slightly less disappointed?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's and I have two mental illnesses, major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation.
Mm. Yeah, that's I guess the first question is, how do you manage that? Because we all, I mean, statistically speaking, right, 89% of suicide, people who attempt suicide are not successful. And then we're coping with it, right? That moment after you are really giving up, surrendering to that suicide, like this is it. And then you're like, okay, I'm left behind. The 11% statistically are what we hear about often, but it's
Hmm?
not the 89% that let's go back to that Desmond Tutu argument. Stop wondering why people are falling in the water. Let's go make sure that they don't fall in the water anymore.
Actually, it's if you're pulling dead bodies out of the river, you need to stop pulling dead bodies out of the river and go upriver and find out how the hell they're getting in there. That's
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification.
Yes, and that fits nicely with they talk about mental wellness, mental health. There's upstream, midstream, downstream. Upstream is when you begin to spiral downward with depression. Midstream is you're beginning to think about ending your life, and downstream is, you actually take your life. Um, it's it's a difficult subject. So my humor, not jokes, but funny personal stories, helps people digest it, makes it much more palatable. I had a guy come up to me after an event I did for a big contracting company, and he said, I've got PTSD. I got it bad. I was a Navy SEAL, and four of my team have already died by suicide. And he said, normally when somebody brings up suicide at a meeting like this, I'll leave. I get out, I'll leave the room. He said, but the way you did it, with your personal stories and your funny personal stories, I was able to sit there the entire time. So quite the compliment.
Yeah, no, to really, I've worked with veterans who've been diagnosed with PTSD. I'm not allowed to treat PTSD since it's a diagnosis, but if you have some traumatic things, I do help out. And when you're sitting with those people, when they had that little spark back in their life, probably similar to the conversations that you've been part of, that that's that moment where you can breathe a little bit easier, that you're making the difference in the world.
Yes, I was in Cincinnati. I was speaking on site at a construction project. Mostly men, 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide in the US currently are men, roughly. And after I do the Q&A when I get done with the keynote, and before I do the Q&A, I say, look, I'm going to do a Q&A, general Q&A. However, if you have a question you want to ask or story you want to tell, and you don't want to do it in front of everybody, I'll hang out an extra 30, 45 minutes. There's always a line.
Mm.
sometimes two people, sometimes 10. On this day, there's half a dozen guys, which is unusual. Men don't tend to talk about these things. Last guy in line is a black gentleman, a carpenter, mid-20s, I'm guessing. He's crying so hard he can't speak. So I waited. When he gathered himself, I said, "Hey, what's up?" He said, "I work on the fifth floor of this building. I think about jumping off every day." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because I've lost three people to violence in the last year, including my daughter who died in my arms."
Oh God.
Whoa. As I like to say, I'd like somebody to pull the pin on that emotional grenade and drop in your lap.
Sure.
So the HR guy who hired me wasn't far away, so I waved him over. I said, "Look, you need to go get the EAP, Employee Assistance Program binder. Turn to mental health. Find the closest mental health facility to where we're standing right now and literally take this gentleman by the hand because he's circling the drain." 2 or 3 months later, I had occasion to talk to the HR guy again, and I'm terrified to ask. Finally, I got up my nerve. I said, "Whatever happened to that nice black carpenter?" He goes, "Frank, he was evaluated, medicated. He's back on the job." Oh, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Sure. Take a deep breath.
Yeah, when I, in a group of speakers, like a networking group, and the question comes up, all right, what's the ROI for the group that hires you? And as we go around the room, I like to be last. More employee engagement, less turnover, so forth and
Yep.
so on. More productivity. They get to me and I go, people don't kill themselves? Anybody beat that? Anybody?
Which leads to those other things that they're also doing, but you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, wow, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is talking about mental wellness and being able to balance that midstream, as you're saying, working on the pre-stream, and unfortunately, there's times for the after stream. But getting those midstream, getting those people to talk about it and getting comfortable, that's really powerful things. Having those 2 to 10 or more people after your talk, right? Not
Hmm.
everybody wants to talk about it, and they need that safe space. And you've
Well,
learned,
go ahead.
and you've learned how to do that.
Well, the client often tells me, I'd say 90% of the time when I get there, we just brought you in to start the conversation on suicide. Because what I discovered when I was preparing for my first TEDx talk, at the time, was one person died in the US by suicide every 11 minutes, and hardly anybody was talking about it, unless you bring it up. And then almost everybody has a story about themselves, about a loved one. Um, yeah, it's it's the final, maybe the final conversational taboo. People just don't talk about it.
So from your experience, how is it better to start off talking about it?
Well, there's an old wives' tale or urban legend that you should never mention the word suicide in front of somebody who's depressed
Mm,
because it might give them the idea. Suicide, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it crossed my mind. Uh, the reverse is true. If you bring it up, then they are less likely to die by suicide. What I teach my audience is how do you spot depression? How do you spot thoughts of suicide? What do you say? What do you do? What don't you say? What don't you do? And then how to find resources and create a self-care plan. So I teach them because 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They can't make up their mind. And 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt. And if you know what to look for in those hints, because something may sound innocuous, but like, yeah, you
but
know what? You're not gonna, these guys are not gonna, let's see, these guys don't have to worry about me anymore after this weekend. Because you're going back to school? Because you're moving? Why? I mean, it sounds innocuous,
right.
but, and there are signs. Signs of, matter of fact, the guy I talked to, somebody I talked to yesterday, I talked about one of the signs of thoughts of suicide is giving away prized possessions because they
Mm,
want to make sure they go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone.
right.
And he had heard that. And he noticed that his friend was uh, giving away things on Facebook, like a set of golf clubs he loved.
Mm,
And so he called him up, "Hey, man, I need to know, are you having thoughts of suicide?" Sure enough, the guy was divesting himself of these things and making sure they went to the people he wanted them to go to. So if you know what you're looking for, anybody can stop a suicide. You can make a difference, you can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as what you and I are doing, and that is starting that conversation if you know how, and I teach my audience how to do it.
Oh, well, can you help teach my audience a little bit, or I know your talk's a lot longer than we're gonna have for
Yeah,
today.
that's
So I'm not like, well, let's kick back and let me get comfortable. But
yeah.
what are some of the things? Obviously, listening, active listening, when you're hearing, hey, yeah, next week, don't worry about it. I'm missing the meeting. You can take me off the calendar. Those
Yeah.
are things that are identifiers. But what are some of the other one or
Well,
two other things?
uh, when I do it, I say, look, people always ask me, how do you know if somebody's depressed? And this is not an exhaustive list, just my top three or four.
Right.
They eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, or can't sleep. They have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, so they're often late for work or class. However, in the afternoon, they rally like a different person. And here's one that's you can observe visually. As long as you've known them, they've been pretty well put together. In the last couple of weeks, hair is kind of dirty, clothes aren't quite so clean. It may be because they're having trouble getting out of bed in the morning, simply to run a little wash and take a shower.
Hmm.
So the question comes up, what do you say to somebody who's depressed? Well, I start with what don't you say? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. My personal favorite, David, have you tried fish oil? At which point I go from suicidal to homicidal. Uh, Now, what you do say, I'm here for you and I mean it. I know you're not lazy or crazy or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time. I'll help you get the treatment. And here's where you have to ask them in no uncertain terms, are you having thoughts of suicide? I tell my audiences, if you can't ask that, find somebody who can. And if you can't, here's my cell number. Call me and I'll ask them. Because again, it reduces the chances they'll die by suicide.
Correct.
So, how do you know if somebody is suicidal? Well, if they don't tell you, they talk a lot about death and dying. Death and dying appears as a theme in their artwork or their music or their writing. Um, they're giving away prized possessions, as we talked about. And here's one that's counterintuitive but dangerous. They've been depressed for a long time, David. However, now they're happy for no apparent reason. And you're happy because they're happy. They may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end. So the question comes up, well, what if they tell you they are suicidal? What do you say? You say, do you have a plan? If they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, time, place, method, you need to do your best to get them to a mental health facility as soon as possible. At the very least, on the phone with 988, the suicide life and text line. And if you are at a distance and you're reading their Facebook timeline and you don't really like what you're seeing, thinking maybe they're rolling up to a suicide, I would call the police in their local town, wherever they are, and ask them to go by and do a welfare check.
Hmm.
Now, the only problem with that is, if the police go there and they are actively suicidal, they'll take them into custody and drag them in front of a judge, and the judge decides if they get a 3-day all expense paid
Yep.
vacation in a mental facility with no belt or shoestrings, and they're going to be pissed. But they're going to unfriend you on Facebook. But at least they'll be alive to unfriend you on Facebook.
100%.
Now, last thing, and I've never seen this in any course I've taken on suicide prevention. What if they have a plan, David, but it's not particularly detailed? It's kind of nebulous. What would you say? Well, I would say, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? If they said no, I would say, great. Tell me why not. Make them give
Mm.
voice to whatever's keeping them here because something is keeping them here, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So that's the teaching I do in my keynote.
Yeah, no, those are obviously all great. You're a very successful speaker, but you also know from experience,
Oh yeah.
and that's also one of the things that we've all learned is when you're a suicide survivor, you really you know your signs,
Hmm.
and sometimes even the tells you might have given out in a lot of cases, and that's where you can then identify it in others. So by
Yep.
you're doing that. Um, so one of the questions I get all the time actually is, how do you know you're not going to do it again? And
Oh. Mm. And I get that. And as a matter of fact, um, I've had people come up to me after my keynote and say, are you gonna kill yourself?
Mm.
And I say no. And they say, tell me why not? Well, it's those people who line up. I feel like George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life, that I've been shown what their lives would be like if I weren't there to tell my story and hear theirs. And if I kill myself, and theoretically, I could take a lot of those people with me who never had a chance to hear me speak or share their story.
Sure.
So I'm stuck.
Yeah, well, it's a good stuck to have, and
That's a good
we're
say.
completely glad. I mean, that's why during my suicide attempt, I heard a voice from Grandpa Mike, which I don't have a Grandpa Mike, so it's a completely different story. And it wasn't God, it wasn't but they said go back and tell your story. And ironically, since that point, I've told this story multiple times, but also I've done some book writing where I tell fiction stories. Align the lines of motivation and things like that,
Mhm.
and empowerment. So I'm like, well, I don't know what story I'm supposed to tell. And then I've also started this podcast, which allows stories like yourself to be out there. So while I'm not trying to steal anybody's story, am I is part of my story to share your story, which I do think it is.
Yes.
Our responsibility is to shine the light a lot
Hmm.
more and talk about it, get some of the stigmas away. While I won't talk about my methods of when I attempted, so nobody copies or anything like that. It's out there. It's not like I was the only one who tried XYZ. The only part I do talk about is the last attempt that I had. I got the rope. Okay, finally, I got it. I'm gonna just do the rope, this and that, and I tied it up. The rope held, and so did I. It held my weight, and I'm hanging there, and I'm like, which is the thing that shook me back into reality. Is like, okay, now you're sort of a dick. Okay, what do you do? And I'm like, okay, now I have to retool everything. I know there's a lot of things I'm not good at, and suicide is one of them, luckily. But which I'm glad
Yeah.
for, um, because of all the things similar to you. All the things I've done is not necessarily to show. It's just to say what you could do from the depth. I wasn't one of those people who, when you've heard stories about people jumping off a bridge or something like that. And
Yeah.
then they go, "Oh my God, I didn't want to do that." I was comfortable in my decision at that time, but I'm even more comfortable in the decision of living every day to my fullest. Not every day is full, but there's something to fill every day.
Well, and as I mentioned, on average, 8 out of 10 people are ambivalent. They can't make up your mind. Apparently, you were one of the 2 out of 10 that
Yeah.
I'm good with it,
Yep.
as was I.
Yeah. And so how do we weave? So like I aspire to weave some of my comedy, or at least make some people to chuckle. But this is a heavy topic.
Hmm.
And I think when we talk about, I mean, even back in the day, you talk about sex in life, right? Well, it's always easier when we make it lighter, right? When you're joking around and talking to the guys and things like that. Same thing with mental wellness. And how do we shift that tough guy conversation? Because I had a lot of times in my softball when I'm playing softball, and I had a lot of guys who were like, "Come on, Mary, come on, stop with the let's not get into fights, let's all these things."
Yeah.
And how do we help move that dial forward?
Well, again, personal stories. Um, I've been a comedian since the day after Christmas, full time, day after Christmas, 1985. So the comedy just occurs to me. I was doing my first TEDx talk. And the first piece of comedy I did in the TEDx talk was, I did some research on TEDx talks as I was preparing. I went to TEDx.com, whatever, to see how other people handle the topic of suicide. Figuring there'd be two, three, 4 dozen talks. There were 3 talks on suicide. I said to the audience, well, duh. If you're really good at suicide, you're probably not going to be recording a TEDx talk. And then they realized, oh my God, this is going to be different. Um, my grandmother killed herself with a gas stove. My great aunt killed herself with a refrigerator. What is it with my family and major appliances? I mean, I go past Home Depot, I tear up. So it's all very personal, stories
Sure.
to, the humorous, not making fun of it, certainly, nothing to joke about. But I mean, I was on a podcast the other day and we're talking about the time I put a gun in my mouth. And the woman said, "So, Frank, what went through your brain there when you had the gun in your mouth?" I said, "Well, pretty soon, a 38 caliber round." She's like, I go, "Relax. It was just too good a setup not to
Right.
make me note."
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a meeting planner called me for NAMI, National Alliance Mental Illness, great organization. It's the Oregon chapter. I was doing a keynote for. I said, "Michelle, what do you want me to cover in the keynote?" She knew I put a gun in my mouth. She goes, "I don't know, just give me some bullet points." And I let that hang in the air until she realized. I go, "Relax, Michelle. It was just too good not to point
Right.
out." So that's I think where the humor comes from. And it's sprinkled throughout.
Sure.
There's a psychological principle, apparently. If you have to tell somebody something serious, and then you give them a little comic relief, and then you tell them the next serious thing, the brain is much better prepared for the next serious thing if they've had some comic relief.
Sure. Sure.
And I believe part of my job as a speaker, make them laugh, make them cry, make them laugh, make them cry. People ask me, "Do you get choked up on stage?" Absolutely. I don't fake it. I don't weep. But when I tell some of those stories, I get, and the audience can tell I'm
Right.
choked up. Yeah, which chokes them up. So
Yeah. As a speaker, and I know you're a speaker coach as well, how do you suggest most people? That's one of those fears is I know when I've gotten emotional on stage, I just take that deep breath and reset myself and knowing how to do that confidence. But a lot of people, that's what sets them off in terms of speaking.
yes, triggers them. The what I tell my students is, look, most of these stories, first time I told them out loud to myself, I wept.
Mm.
So I just kept telling to myself, walking the dogs, driving the car, over and over and over till I was just at the point where I get a little choked up. And that's where you want to be. So do it enough times to get to the point where you just get a little catch in your voice, or you have to take a deep breath, or
Yep.
that's I think that's the magic is because some of those things, man, I'm walking dogs.
Yeah, probably not the best way to do a presentation, but
No.
but it's good. And but what happens when you don't know? Something because I've spoken a couple of times about a girlfriend that I had 30 years ago. When I was in my 20s, and every now and then when I talk about her, she died by uh, somebody got she was by a drunk driver. She was hit by a drunk driver.
Mm.
And so every time I talk about her, like now I feel fine. But there's times that I just am emotionally involved in that talk, and it
Mm.
just hits me unexpectedly.
Yes, and I'm never sure if I'm going to get choked up. I just let it happen naturally. And if it
Mhm.
happens, it
Sure.
happens. If it doesn't, I'm not going to force it.
Yeah.
The
No. No.
funny, the
Yeah.
funny, I'm going to force.
Right. Well, hopefully you're not forcing it. It just comes natural.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think my mental illnesses are the flip side of my creativity, imagination, and comic ability. Same brain, same wiring. I can teach you to write, stand up, and perform it. I cannot teach you to what to do with the incoming information.
Right.
Yeah. And because I mean, I turn things around. I've been heckled, and I heckle back, and people ask me, "Man, that was great. How'd you think that up?" Honestly, I didn't think it. When you heard it,
Well,
I heard it. I had no
right.
idea that was coming.
Right. It becomes a reflex because
Yeah.
you have that creative mind. And that's one of the things I talk about often is saying, if you're going to doubt something, doubt your doubts. And, we can all come up with a million reasons why. It used to be this TV show that I loved. I watched it when it was on Netflix. Like, what is it? 1,000 Ways to Die. And it was with
Yeah.
Mandy Patinkin, right? And, it was the weirdest things. Like the first person died of a asteroid. Could that have happened? Yes, right. But all of these things, and I remember one episode, like monkeys were running across the street and they knocked over the wire. The wire hit into the can. It was like a Rube, it was an exercise in what was it? It's
Rube Goldberg.
Yeah, Rube Goldberg. Yeah, and Um, and the person died because they were just watching it all. So when it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and just it's not going to be something like that. And the same thing with dealing with worries and the concerns. There's always a solution. It might not be the solution you want, but having the power of knowing the solution is, just that's why you need to take that breath back and figure out what your solutions are.
Well, and as somebody who has chronic suicidal ideation, because not there are a lot of people, even therapists, who have no idea what that is. It's not in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the big book of
Mm.
diseases. I say to the audience, what it means for me and people in my tribe is that suicide's always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, I tell the audience, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had three thoughts: one, get it fixed; two, buy a new one; three, hell, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. And almost every time I've spoken, there's been somebody in the audience who has it. And they invariably don't know it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak and all alone. I had a young woman come up after a college presentation. She said, "Thanks for the keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She goes, "But I got to tell you, it made me weep." "How did it make you weep?" She said, "You know the story about the car, get it fixed, buy into it and kill yourself? I've been having those thoughts all my life. I thought it was just me. I didn't know that had a name. I just thought I was some kind of freak. And then when I heard you say it's a thing and you have it, I realized," she said, "for the first time in my life, that I am not, in fact, alone." And I wept. And that's the power of starting the conversation.
Yeah, well, so when you feel so, since that's always an option, right? In theory, it's always there. How do you
Yeah,
know that you discount it? To make sure that not an option, because you've now built up some resources to make sure that when that happens, that doesn't mean you're not going to think about it, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, actually, it's ironic. It's as somebody I know, a psychiatrist who had, he's now passed away naturally. Um, he had chronic suicidal ideation. And he said, "Frank, if it was not for my chronic suicidal ideation, I would have killed myself a long time ago," because he knew he had an out.
Mm,
Suicide's, for the most part, all about pain, ending the pain.
correct.
And I could stand a great deal more pain knowing that I could opt out at any point.
Mm,
Yeah. It's like in Oregon, death with dignity. If you have a terminal illness and a doctor and a psychiatrist says you've only got like 5, 6 months to live and you're of sound mind, then you can order the cocktail and choose your time to go. And interestingly, I think people who do that live longer and a better quality of life because they know if it begins to decline, they can check out anytime. It's about control.
yeah, and I think there's a power. I'm in favor of that, because there's certain things. I mean, my dad had passed on with uh, Alzheimer's, but they kept on. They wanted. He was on that borderline, and at one point we were at the family meetings, and they wanted to put a feeding tube in him, and I was, in control of that. I was like, no, that wasn't his wishes. And they were like, well, we could ask him. I'm like, okay, go for it. We never ruled out to be him to be incapacitated. I was like, Dad, they'd like to put a food feeding tube, and he said it in his terms, and he goes, I'll rip it out. I go, thank you. I think there's a dignified way, and I've seen, unfortunately, a bunch of people who chosen other ways, and you know there's a dignity to it when you choose. It's we know when we want to get off our ride,
Yeah.
as long as it's not an escape package uh, for other challenges.
Yes. And there is some argument in the mental health community about, whose life is it anyway?
Hmm.
And what if, you're not going to leave behind any collateral damage? I mean, you don't have any family.
Right.
I guess your friends, perhaps, but no family that you're abandoning. That they're going to suffer because you're gone. I mean, who is it to say, you know, your life?
Yep. Well, we'll see. I guess that's a bigger, larger, more moral, conversation. I think you and I sit on the same side of that. At least
Well,
ideally.
there are a lot of people who disagree with us.
Yep.
Well, when I came so close to killing myself, my next door neighbor said, "You know, if you killed yourself, you'd have gone to hell." And I said, "Yeah, what you don't know is I was already there."
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it is. A lot of times people don't understand the amount of pain that you feel, even if it's psychological, is still
Yeah.
pain, right? You know, it's that can't because our body does that. That's the other one of the other things I really learned and embraced a lot more now is that somatic, pain and the pains that we have and where it is. I never realized like my neck hurts a lot of times, which it still does, right? Life's going to keep hurting us because that's where I keep my stresses on.
Ah,
So and once I now know that it's I recognize, okay, did I hurt myself? Did I, fall? Yeah. Okay, then maybe that's not the stress. But the other pieces are I recognize how I feel as a body. So that way, for me, that identifies where I'm going and what I'm thinking. Like even this past, month when I experienced some of these heart things, they're like, man, you have a really good mindset. I was like, yeah, I had to. I had to learn to to do it.
yeah.
I didn't have an option. And I knew, ironically, 6 years ago, I didn't want to live, and now when they told me, like there's a good chance that that might not happen, I was like, hell, man, and I'm going to change my diet. I want to be here now.
Yes, I've had two aortic valve replacements, and the replacement of a replacement is very difficult. It took 11 hours and change. That's a long time to be under and on the bypass machine. But going into that, as they're rolling me down that corridor, dying by suicide as a concept versus they told me 10% chance I was not coming out the other end. All of a sudden it becomes very concrete.
Mm.
You could die. Yes, fortunately, actually the surgeon was Korean, very talented, but not a lot of bedside manner. First thing he said to me when we met, "Hi, I'm Dr. Ko. 10% chance you're going to die." I said, "Dr. Ko, I'm a writer." I would have phrased that a little differently. 90% chance everything goes well, Frank. We're good. However, it is open heart surgery, so there is, a 10% chance that, but it turns out he had a sense of humor because he said, "I've got plan A, plan B, and plan C." I go, "Why do you have three plans?" He goes, "Because, Frank, I don't want to be in the shower the day after we do the surgery and you've died. And I'm soaping up and I'm thinking to myself, oh, hell, I could have done that. I don't
Uh,
want to be in the, I don't want to be in there improv. I said, what's plan A? We go in, we're able to, tie down the valve, no leaks, sew you back up, you're fine. B, we do the best we can. Maybe there's a leak here, a leak there. Maybe you end up going to the Cleveland Clinic to get they make like a polyester.
the valve.
Yeah, yeah. I said, what's plan C? He goes, you don't want to know plan C. So, so he did have a sense of humor, and he's a great surgeon. The head surgeon came in halfway through my operation because the PA, there was a surgical PA there. He told me this. He said, the surgical PA said, the Dr. Duke was his name. He comes in, looks into my chest. He and the PA lock eyes, and the PA said, Frank, in all the time I've worked with him, I've never seen him scared until that moment. And he goes, I never want to see that again. Because they were afraid, 11 hours, I could have neurological damage,
Right. It all starts.
heart could be leaking, So,
Well, again, I'm glad that happened, and I'm sure you didn't want to see it. You were like, hey, I'm glad I was out.
yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matter of fact, one of the best moments of my life was the nurses helping me into my bed in a regular room. And she goes, I bet you're glad that's over. And I said to her, what's over? She goes, you have a new valve. I got a new valve? Yeah, because you're with the anesthesia, you just,
Yeah, you're just out, right? Yeah.
yep.
How does a person write good jokes, right? If you have a subject like mental wellness, which is generally a dark subject, uh, how do you write good jokes? I mean, that's personally where I'm struggling with trying to figure out how to weave it both as an advocate, but also, for some more awareness.
Yes. Well, Judy Carter, friend of mine, wrote a book. two books actually, one called the Comedy Bible and now the New Comedy Bible. In the Comedy Bible, there was some script writing and sitcom writing and so forth about being funny. The New Comedy Bible, nothing but comedy, stand up. And she's got a formula. She said you take your real experience and you ask yourself four questions. What's stupid about this? What's hard about this? What's scary about this? What's weird about this? And if you ask yourself those four questions about that situation, chances are there's something scared, stupid, weird, or
Hard.
scared. Yeah, hard about that. So that's that's one of the ways you can. It's a good way to write jokes using your real life
Mm.
rather than a setup punch about something that didn't happen to you. Also, for joke writing, when I was writing for Leno, everybody's working from the same source material. Back then, it was newspapers. I would read the New York Times, USA Today every day. And what you do is five columns and do a brain dump. People, places, things, events, cliches. People, places, things, events, cliches. And you start, let's say it's something, you know, political, or let's say sports, football. So you list, stadium as a place, referees, you list the players, positions, coach,
Yep.
uh, cliches. The score wasn't as close as it appeared. Yes, it was. Yeah, I mean, so you make a list of all these things, people, places, events, things, events, cliches. And then you try to find in there, oftentimes two things that don't really go together to
Oh.
create the joke. And that was my technique for taking those topical items from the newspaper and, you know, one of my favorites that Jay Leno bought, he did a joke one night about the Swiss. So, Switzerland, they now have a condom factory. Do you really want to buy a condom from a country that developed Swiss cheese? So, what I would do is I would write down all the jokes that he did, basically the premises, and see if I couldn't write a better one. So I got it. I thought Swiss. So I put Swiss. What about Swiss? Swiss skiing, chalet, things, a knife, Swiss Army knife. And I thought that's the joke. So I sent it in. It was, Swiss have a, factory for condoms. Of course, the Swiss is not just a condom, it's a screwdriver, it's a pair of scissors, it's, and it killed. But that's where it came from making that list of things that were Swiss.
Okay.
People, places, things,
All
events,
right. Yep.
cliche. Yep.
All right. So that's a good way. It's getting me some juices. I want to step back into the comedy side as well as the speaking side. So
I would buy Judy's book, The New Comedy Bible, and there's a workbook with fillable PDFs that goes with it. I would, you know,
okay.
first thing I've been through the course. The book, first thing she said was do a brain dump for 30 minutes. This is back pen and paper. Starting with your first memory, and then just like chronologically as you remember it. So one of my first memories was that I was in a neighborhood with 11 girls and me. So what was I don't know hard about that was I didn't know Little League Baseball existed. I would have loved to have played Little League Baseball. We played horses. And the hard thing about that is when you get to junior high school, you realize there is no equestrian team. And when you played doctor, there were 11 women and me. So there was always a line. It was more like playing HMO. Those jokes came from using Judy's formula, my real stories and
Right.
her formula. So I would advise anybody. Matter of fact, another speaker of mine, Matt Music, who lives in Long Island.
Hey,
I
yeah.
said,
Well,
I
okay.
said, Matt, we talked about this off air. Um, there's at least one or two comedy clubs there. One of them's got to have a comedy course, stand-up
Mhm.
comedy course. Sure enough, it does. He had read Judy's book before he went in, and what the instructor was saying was very similar to what Judy had been teaching him in the book. So, I mean, he was way ahead of the other students, even the first day, because he'd read Judy's book, worked through the exercises. And my favorite joke of Matt's is something that actually happened in real life. He was on Long Island at a wedding. He's a DJ. He's got all his stuff set up. He hasn't played a song yet. And when he got there, he said, Frank, I just felt this vibe. It didn't seem really like my people. There was something off. So before he even plays a record, or spins the CD or whatever you do these days. Somebody in the back of the room yelled at him, "You suck!" And Matt, without missing a beat, goes, "Dad?" Brilliant, brilliant ad lib. Now, and he would tell you he has no idea where that came from. That's not uncommon. I don't know. I didn't actually think it before I said it. Now, there are moments, David, where I think before I speak, because sometimes it's, it may, I do, I, um, people have said to me, "Didn't you think about that before you said it?" And I never tell them, yes, I thought about it, I weighed the odds, and I said it in in a nanosecond. It's a judgment call.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I guess that's how you train yourself. I know that there's times that I've trained myself in a bunch of different ways where you're like, I could say it, it's that, practice the pause type of thinking and learning with, the various techniques that I teach people. I'm like, look, it's always easier if you could slow down your response just that 1 second, you'll actually speed up your mind and get through some of the challenges that we face.
Yes, and um, I have a bit in my act about I always hear two voices all the time. The devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other. And I believe most everybody does. For example, I'm at the airport here in Eugene. It's a small to medium-sized airport. And they the TSA was shorthanded that day because I got picked for a second, for the more thorough inspection. And it's supposed to be a man patting down a man and a woman patting down a woman, but they were shorthanded. So I'm standing there with my feet on the dance steps, arms out, and the woman, darling, steps in front of me, looks me right in the eye, and they have changed the verbiage since then. But she said, "Sir, are there any parts of your body more sensitive to touch than others?" And I heard the voices, "Say it. You're going to jail." I said, "Yes, sugar, and how much for that?" Do you know the airport has a basement fully stocked with FBI agents? Yeah. Yeah. The bad news is I missed my flight. The good news is my prostate's fine. So, boom. But I believe, and when I do this bit, and then somebody says something, and there's an obvious dirty joke to go with it, I swear the audience can see it cross my mind because as soon as it does, you'll hear somebody in the audience go, "Say it."
Yeah, and right, and that's so important also to have that rapport with the audience because where rapport is important for everything, right? Speaking as well as comedy. You hope you have
Yep.
you hope you have a rapport, but if not, it becomes a long night, a long 8 to well, however long the set might be. So
Yeah. And I've been working cruises doing stand-up since 2009. I've done 166 cruises. And I do a lot of audience work. I come out, I'm build myself in the program for the day as comedy and conversation.
mm,
And I come out and I go, "Look, here's the deal. Uh, it's comedy and conversation. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you didn't get the joke, raise your hand. If I'm talking too fast, just scream out, 'You're talking too fast.'" So sure enough, first night, hand goes up in the front row. You didn't get the joke? Nope. Okay, let's back up. All right, here comes the setup. You ready? I gave her the setup. I said, "You got that?" Yep. Here comes the punchline. Boom. And she roars, and the audience goes nuts. When one of the reasons I do bring the fourth wall down is I go off on tangents if I'm doing audience work.
sure.
Sometimes I can't find my way back. So I'll just turn to the audience and go, "Where in the hell was I?" And somebody else scream, "You're talking about the Waffle House." "Oh, yeah, the Waffle House." And people have accused me of doing that on purpose to look human. "Oh,
Right.
yeah, I forgot on purpose." But I like that, because there's a certain amount of laughter you get with a joke you've written and done over and over. I believe it's like in the Olympics, a degree of difficulty. If you can make them laugh off the cuff, then the laugh is bigger because they know it just happened. Although I have a lot of those audience responses in my head. You're an attorney or you're a doctor or what.
I think that's what it is. It's all being prepared and to go back. Once we're prepared, we can handle a lot more jokes, comments, and life a little bit more as well.
Yes. And I got fired off a number of cruise lines. I got fired from the entire Carnival fleet, actually. Not because I got drunk or got stoned or, harassed a passenger. Just wrong cruise director, wrong time.
Mm.
And for matter of fact, Carnival, their number one cruise director, John Heald, very popular with the passengers. The crew and the staff hated him. He lied about everything. They called him the Lion King. And he wanted to be the funniest person on the boat. And apparently I was funnier. So he told Carnival to fire me from the entire 22 ship fleet.
Wow.
Well, karma, you know, a month later, the first Carnival ship to go dead in the water with an engine room fire, there have been some since, um, was the Carnival Splendor. And my wife saw it on CNN. She called me. She goes, "Turn on TV. Is that the Splendor?" And I go, "Yeah." She goes, "Is John Hill still on there?" I go, "Yep." And they were 3 days off San Diego and they had no power. So no toilets, no air conditioning, no food service. And the Coast Guard's flying out porta potties and Pop Tarts. So I wrote a joke that I said, I wrote John a letter. I said, "Dear John, if you fuck me again, I'll sink it." Of course, I didn't because you put the you
Right,
put,
right. You make the joke that
yes, Homeland Security gonna come see you. But yeah, so it's but after that, I decided, my wife and I talked about it. I'm not gonna put any more emotional energy in trying to get booked back on the ship. I'm just gonna do my show, do the best I can because I've been fired when I had good shows, bad shows. So I just and my shows got about 25% funnier. And the guy came up to me after a show one night. He said, "Frank, I gotta ask you, how do you get that comfortable up there?" I said, "Do you really want to know?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "I don't give a shit." Because I was just having a good time. I just did my thing, had a good time, didn't worry about getting booked back because who knows? It's a freaky business.
Yeah, well, I think that's what it is. Is also when you get into that confidence level of I don't care, not that you don't care about the performance,
Yeah, oh yeah.
but the performance. I know you really care about the performance, mhm, but there's nothing that anybody else is gonna kind of throw at you. That you're like, all right, whatever, I'll figure it out. That's you know, I'm just stepping into that part of my life where I'm like, all right, I'll just figure it out, and it's
Yeah,
powerful.
and another cruise, I was on stage and it got done, and it was just me and another a guy in the audience. He comes walking down the stairs and he said, "I got a question for you." I go, "Oh, shoot." He goes, um, "We had lunch together today." I go, "Yeah, I remember." And he goes, "My question is, how can you be the same guy at lunch that you are up there?"
Mm,
I said, "Well, it took me about 25 years to just be myself. It's a lot more difficult than you think just to be yourself."
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we have so many pressures and things like that. So, one of the pressures that we have is we're getting closer to the end of the
Oh,
episode.
oh.
Uh, oh, go. You have something else, or
No,
you were just joking?
yeah.
So, but what I want to do is I always have people walk into the magic garden and to plant a seed, of knowledge. You've given us a lot of knowledge. We started off with a little bit of a heavy subject,
Mhm.
and still a little bit of a heavy subject, especially if you're not getting any laughs on your comedy. But or I guess well, I won't say if you're on Carnival. I've been on a Carnival and I had a good
Yeah.
time. I guess I had a different cruise director. But so that might grow, the seed might grow in the future. What piece of advice could you give us today?
Well, whether you are a comedian, a speaker, or an entrepreneur of any stripe, my advice is to pick a lane. Be the best person in that lane. No side hustles, just be the expert or thought leader if you're a speaker. Um, comedians need a hook, and you need to be yourself.
Mm,
There's a show called it's about a guy in New York, comic, who goes there and he's couch surfing and he's trying to get do well in the comedy world, and he has a good set one night and he goes back to the owner of the club and he said, "I had a great set." She goes, "Yeah, I saw it, but I'd prefer you had a bad set." "What do you mean?" She goes, I don't just need another 6 foot tall, brown haired white guy telling jokes. I watched your set. I still know nothing about you.
Mm,
So in comedy, you need to be, you find your voice, as they used to say. You need to find your voice. In speaking, you need to, I believe, pick a lane. Don't have half a dozen keynotes. Be the expert because nowadays meeting planners want to see your name in this sentence. Frank King is an expert in suicide prevention, and your website should reflect that. That when they go to my website, it just screams suicide prevention, nothing else. There's some drop down menus, other programs,
sure,
but the
but that
site
but that's your
itself, yes. And if you're just an entrepreneur, I've got a friend in town, two actually. One has an auto body shop, one runs radio stations, owns radio stations, both super successful. And I thought to myself, what do they have in common? And I realized they both do one thing and they do it better than anybody else in town. Now, the second half of that is you need to know who your ideal clients are because you don't want to spray and pray in your marketing. You want to figure out who needs what you have to say, whether it's comedy or speaking or it's a product like radio station or auto body shop, and is willing to pay for it. Well, Todd, who owns the body shop, it's in uh, it's in Eugene, Springfield, and this is a very green, sustainability, environmental conscious. He decided every product in his shop, paints, lacquers, whatever, environmentally friendly, costs more, takes longer to dry, but in this area, there are
but
so
right.
many.
Right. His customers, that's what they want. That's what they. Yeah, you have to give them what they want, and no,
Yep.
and he knew because he knew who his audience was, how to give it to them.
And I said, Todd, how far out are you? He goes, I got about 6 weeks. So if I took my car today, got the estimate, I couldn't bring it back for 6 weeks. She's got 6 weeks of cars lined up. So I believe that is, picking a lane and deciding who your ideal clients are and just focusing on them.
All right. Well, thank you. That was awesome. And then how can everybody find you?
Can't, I'm in a bunker.
Okay.
No, mental health comedian. Just type those words in there, mental health comedian, you'll find me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll make sure that everybody finds you, Frank, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate everything.
My pleasure, man. Glad you're still here.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad you're still here, and we'll keep this and building this going forward. And for everybody else, want to wish you peace and love in your life. Bring that as much as you can, and if you don't feel it, double the dosage. And then when you have something?
I was going, well, when you get done, if you allow me, I'll close the show like a comedian.
Okay, yeah, sure. And then of course, when you bring a bat, bring some awesome thoughts, and we're gonna let Frank close the show today with what he wanted to say.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe and tell your friends. If you did not enjoy this podcast, we hope you have no friends.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, and I hope everybody has friends. But if you don't, reach out to me. I'll be your friend.